There's this chapter of Vinland Saga in which a random soldier, now fatally struck and dying, begins to think of what's happening around him. He notices the battle being fought, that his commander is absolutely owning the field, which leads him to remember that the Valkyries will be coming soon to take him to Valhalla. As he waits and waits, he begins to notice that nothing happens. No Valkyries are coming, that this might be the end of his life and there is nothing more to follow. He curses his position, upset that he's been lied to all his life, and he dies. In a moment of anxiety, panic, and fear, his life is lost to the great beyond, and there's nothing more to it than darkness. When I first read this chapter all those years ago, I remember having massive anxiety. I'm afraid of death. I mean, I'd wager most of us have some sort of fear of dying, but mine is a little crippling. When I get into thinking about death combined with my ADHD, it sends me into a spiral. My mind wanders and thinks about those last moments. What will not be coming after? What will I feel? How will it feel to move on to the next stage of our soul's journey? And it kinda destroys me. Sometimes I lay in bed at night, and right before I fall asleep, I begin to have a panic attack, and I turn to my wife, who's sleeping right next to me, and I hold her tight, just to feel like I'm not alone, that it's okay, that everyone has to experience death as it is a part of life. I've felt this way close to 10 years. I don't know what to do. Vinland Saga has been a story that I have grown to absolutely adore. A story of a young man who is placed in an awful situation due to some even more awful circumstances. Living in an age of war and slavery, Thorfinn seeks revenge for his father's death, and ultimately doesn't get it. His father's killer, Aslad, being killed before he could reach any form of closure. Thorfinn is a character who is put through the ringer and comes out the worst for it. At the beginning of Season 2, the slavery arc, Thorfinn is broken and lost and hollow, now forcefully made a slave, hence the name of the arc. He is a shell of who he was before, and this makes the perfect template and start for a story of redemption. After meeting Einar, a fellow slave, and reflecting on his past and how his actions affected so many, Thorfinn begins to take his first steps on this road to redemption, and Sverkel, one of the best characters in the story so far and father of the owner of the farm, helps him understand this. He tells Thorfinn of this analogy of being empty, and that being the best place to find oneself if one wants to be reborn. So after some introspection and some amazing imagery and nightmare fuel, Thorfinn understands what he must do. With the help of Aslad, Thorfinn comes to the conclusion that he will never hurt anyone again, for those people did nothing to him. They weren't his enemies. As Thor's said, no one is born with an enemy. No one has true enemies. This oath that Thorfinn takes is honestly one of the best things to come from the story. A story that focuses on the violence of Vikings and how cool Thorfinn is as a character and a fighter, and how that person chooses to be a pacifist. This turn of events is honestly what elevated the source material for me to the level of masterpiece. It was as if I saw the puzzle pieces that Makoto Yukimura laid out, him being the author of Vinland Saga, come together. A genuine aha moment that made me realize the kind of story I was reading. The depths of this goes even further with the introduction of Gardar. Gardar is a slave who is married to Arnheid, one of the other slaves on Ketil's farm, which, as I mentioned before, is the setting for the second season. Before becoming slaves, they both had a child named Hjalti, who was kidnapped when Vikings pillaged their village, taking advantage of the fact that Gardar and the men of the village left to find iron in a different location. Iron that was ultimately not needed and left the village defenseless. In the present, Arnheid just so happens to be Ketil's forced lover, and not only is she pregnant with Ketil's child, But her life and those of everyone at the farm gets turned upside down when Garter escapes his captivity and ends up reuniting with Arnheid, setting up a series of events that eventually test Thorfinn's resolve to find a place where no violence is needed to resolve conflict. Unfortunately, in his escape, Garter has killed more than a few of Snake's men, Snake being one of the top guards of the farm, so he's captured. Thorfinn, determined to stop Snake from killing Garter, gets in the way and realizes that unfortunately he has to use force to put an end to Snake's approach. Thorfinn, now a slave, understands how slavery can change a man, and he genuinely wants to find an outcome where everyone can come out unscathed. But the reality of this world is far more brutal than that of the pacifist mindset. So Thorfinn fights in order to protect the life, a fight that he ultimately loses, as Snake inflicts a mortal injury on Garter. After Snake is subdued by Garter himself, however, Arnheid attempts to escape with the help of Sverkel, and this is where one of the best scenes of this season begins. The animation, the storyboarding, the added content that enhances the story, everything was incredible and helped the source material soar, and also helped my heart break. Garter now slowly dying in the cart with Arnheid at his side. That whole scene did something to me. As I kept watching, I felt my emotions and my tears well up. The poignancy of the scene paired with an incredible piano score that pulled at the heartstrings. As Garter recalls key moments in his life, moments of pain, of joy, and of regret. He misses his son and understands that many of the choices he made that led to this point could have been so very different, but there was nothing he or anyone could do. As he lays down on Arnheid's lap, he starts fading, and we are treated to a beautiful reunion between father and son in the afterlife. A moment, a small glimpse of hope for redemption for this man who made so many wrong choices in life, but who was still human at the end of the line. Vinland Saga is a story of forgiveness, a story of people fighting hard to move on from the shackles of the past, to move on from what holds them down in this cycle of violence and death. Thorfinn understands this, and ultimately, Garter is a reflection, an outcome of what could happen to Thorfinn had he not started on the path of a pacifist, of pacifism. As for me, this scene with Garter, this whole story it hit harder than a ton of bricks. As a father of 3, seeing my kids grow and become their own people day by day has given me fulfillment I still can't comprehend. And in Garter's final moments, the only thing that brought him even a glimmer of respite and hope was the view of his smiling son, waiting for Dad. So it got me to thinking, what does Yukimura really believe? In the later chapter with the soldier, he dies and there's nothing after. With Garter, there seems to be a hope of something after death. But in truth, this really doesn't matter. What matters is that this is a moment of regret finding an outcome, an avenue for those feelings, and seeing how someone can reach the end with a shred of happiness after a life of so much turmoil. On his Twitter account, Makoto Yukimura said a lot about episode 17, but this particular tweet stood out to me. And this is translated via Google Translate on Twitter, so it's probably wrong. If you know the true translation, please let me know. But it says, I think that if any person lives for a certain amount of time, there will be some regrets. If only I had tried harder then. If you choose this, I think it's very difficult to live without regrets. Garter is a massive regrets, a massive explosive regretting energy. Maybe some people live with regret. Everyone will make decisions that will have a negative outcome in this life, and we will have regrets. It's inevitable. But what we shouldn't forget, what we cannot forget, is that life goes on and we can make better choices later on, as long as we don't take the time we have on this planet for granted. I still don't have an answer to my anxiety of death. I still feel fear of the unknown very strongly, and will probably still have nights like the ones I mentioned before. But I think this episode and story made me reflect on those fears and what I can maybe do to help me give some ease. To remember that my life does have meaning, and that my loved ones will be here with me, And I think that this can apply to everyone else that feels similarly to me. So start new, reflect, let go of your past, look straight ahead, and reach for that peaceful world you want. Reach for that promised land. Reach for your very own Vinland. Thanks for watching.